Sudan is a nation that has faced numerous challenges throughout its history. Located at the crossroads between the Arab region in the north and east and sub-Saharan Africa to the south and west, this geographical intersection has shaped Sudan's culture from the 14th to the 15th century. In the 19th century, Arab nomads migrated to the area of modern Sudan and began settling there. At that time, the region was home to various African peoples. The Funj Kingdom and the Darfur Kingdom in what is now Western Sudan were governed by African rulers, while the Ottomans controlled the eastern regions and the coastline. The Arabs later annexed Sudan and progressively Arabized its population. In 1899, under British pressure, Egypt agreed to establish Sudan as a condominium jointly governed by Britain and Egypt. The nominally independent territory of Darfur, ruled by African leaders, was invaded by the British and Egyptians in 1916 and subsequently incorporated into Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. This marked the establishment of Sudan's borders, which remained intact through the 20th century. After escaping British and Egyptian rule, Sudan gained independence in 1956, emerging as Africa's largest country and one of the 10 largest nations in the world at the time. With its position at the crossroads of Arab and African regions, Sudan is one of the world's most culturally diverse nations. It is home to nearly 600 ethnic groups speaking over 400 languages, though Arabic is widely spoken in the north and English is prevalent in the south due to colonial influence. The northeastern region of Sudan follows the Upper Nile and has a coastline along the Red Sea, primarily inhabited by Arabs and Muslims. In contrast, the western region, southern Darfur, and southern Sudan are significantly more diverse. Darfur is predominantly Muslim, but most of its population consists of sub-Saharan African ethnic groups, largely sedentary farmers, with a small number of nomadic Arab pastoralists in the north. On the other hand, southern Sudan is home to hundreds of distinct sub-Saharan ethnic groups, most of whom do not follow Islam but adhere to various faiths, including traditional African religions and Christianity. Due to deep internal divisions, tensions began to rise in Sudan between the Arab Muslim-dominated north and the ethnically and religiously diverse peripheral regions. The country's first civil war erupted between the north and the south in 1955, a year before independence. The Sudanese Civil War is one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts in African history. These wars not only had a profound impact on the fate of Sudan, but also left a significant mark on the entire East African region. With over 2 million deaths and millions more displaced, the Sudanese Civil War stands as an unforgettable historical tragedy. Civil War, 1955 to 1972. The First Sudanese Civil War began shortly before Sudan gained independence from Britain and Egypt in 1956, triggered by the government's assimilation policies targeting southern Sudan. The South, consisting mainly of indigenous communities practicing traditional religions and Christianity, resisted these policies. After Sudan's independence in 1956, the northern government, dominated by the military and Islamic groups, immediately implemented policies of Islamization and Arabization, sparking widespread discontent in the South. Southern leaders felt excluded from the political processes of the newly independent nation. These tensions led to an uprising in 1955, initiated by a group of Southern soldiers in response to oppression and inequity imposed by the northern government. Although the rebellion was harshly suppressed in its initial stages, it ignited a prolonged conflict that lasted 17 years. This war was primarily a guerrilla struggle, with southern armed groups such as the Anya fighting against the northern government forces. The conflict was mostly concentrated in the rural areas of southern Sudan, involving skirmishes between government troops and guerrilla fighters. As the war dragged on, external factors, including interventions by Egypt, Ethiopia, and other nations, further complicated the situation. In 1972, the Addis Ababa Agreement was signed, bringing an end to the First Civil War. The agreement granted Southern Sudan autonomy and promised a unified government. However, the deep-rooted divisions between the North and South were not fully resolved, and political instability persisted in the following years. The Second Sudanese Civil War, 1983 to 2005. The Second Sudanese Civil War erupted in 1983 when Northern President Jafar Nimeri decided to impose Islamic law, Sharia, across Sudan, including the South. This decision flagrantly violated the terms of the Addis Ababa Agreement, which had granted autonomy to the South. The Northern government not only reinstated Islamic law, but also divided the South into 3 regions, significantly reducing its autonomy. These policies intensified dissatisfaction in the South and fueled stronger opposition from Southern ethnic groups. The Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA, led by Colonel John Garang, became the principal fighting force against the Northern government. The SPLA's objectives extended beyond Southern autonomy to advocating for the rights of Southern people within a multi-religious and multi-ethnic nation. The SPLA fought not only against the Northern government forces, but also against pro-government militias such as the Janjaweed, infamous for their brutality and deadly tactics targeting non-Arab communities. This war inflicted massive damage on Sudan and drew significant international attention. Countries and humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, the United States, and various NGOs, provided aid to southern populations living in refugee zones. Peace negotiations between the Sudanese government and the SPLA began in the 1990s, but failed to yield significant results for many years. Meanwhile, relentless and brutal conflicts continued. The Sudanese government used aerial bombings and heavy-handed military strategies, while the SPLA and southern armed groups persisted with guerrilla tactics. The war was intense, involving major battles and attacks on civilian areas, resulting in millions of deaths from combat, famine, and disease. Finally, international mediation, led by countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway, as well as international organizations, culminated in the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, in 2005. This agreement not only ended the war, but also granted autonomy to Southern Sudan and promised a referendum in 2011 to decide whether the South would become an independent nation. The referendum, held in January 2011, saw the participation of over 3 million Southern Sudanese voters, with over 98% supporting independence. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan officially became an independent nation, marking the end of a struggle that had lasted more than half a century. This was a monumental victory for the Southern Sudanese people, but also presented immense challenges for the new nation. Despite achieving independence, South Sudan faced numerous challenges. Its economy heavily depended on oil, but the country's infrastructure had been devastated during the war. Politically, South Sudan was unstable, as conflicts among ethnic groups and internal military factions led to unrest, eventually spiraling into internal civil war in later years. The Sudanese Civil War, spanning over 50 years, claimed more than 2 million lives, caused immense material losses, fractured communities, and destroyed the country's infrastructure. For South Sudan, independence marked the beginning of a daunting journey toward building a stable and prosperous nation. The legacy of these civil wars serves as a profound lesson on the dangers of religious, ethnic, and political divisions. These divisions were not only the root causes of conflict, but also a reminder of the importance of addressing societal inequalities while respecting the rights of all ethnic and religious groups. The Sudanese civil wars exemplify how unresolved political and social issues can lead to prolonged conflict, leaving devastating consequences for both the nation and the broader region. The Darfur War, 2003. The Darfur War was an armed conflict that began in 2003 in the Darfur region of Western Sudan. This war lasted for many years, causing severe consequences for the local population, with millions suffering from famine, disease, violence, and loss of life. The causes of the conflict stemmed from ethnic inequality, disputes over resources, dissatisfaction with the government, and political tensions in the region. The war in Darfur originated from ethnic discrimination and the injustices faced by the local population. Sudan is a country sharply divided between Arab groups and indigenous ethnic groups, with Arabs dominating political, economic, and social power. Ethnic minorities in Darfur, such as the Fur, Masalit, and Zaghawa people, had long endured discrimination and marginalization by the central government in Khartoum. The Sudanese government, led by President Omar al-Bashir, predominantly Arab, failed to provide sufficient support in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and public services to Darfur, leaving the local population feeling abandoned and oppressed. In addition, the war arose from disputes over resources, particularly land and water. Darfur, a dry region, faced intense competition for arable land and water, which were vital for survival. Conflicts between farmers and nomadic herders over resource control further heightened tensions. In 2003, two main armed rebel groups, the Justice and Equality Movement, JEM, and the Sudan Liberation Movement, SLM, began attacking Sudanese government targets to demand rights for the people of Darfur. The Sudanese government responded by deploying the military and a notorious Arab militia known as the Janjaweed. These militias committed numerous atrocities, including looting, rape, and killings, targeting non-Arab communities. The Janjaweed attacks resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands and displaced millions from their homes, triggering a severe refugee crisis. Villages were burned, civilians massacred, and women subjected to systematic sexual violence, turning Darfur into a battlefield of destruction. This situation not only exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, but also led to mass displacement, with millions living in makeshift refugee camps, lacking food, clean water, and basic necessities. The Darfur conflict attracted significant international attention. The United Nations and humanitarian organizations strongly condemned the violence perpetrated by the Sudanese government and militias. In 2005, the UN criticized Sudan for failing to stop attacks on civilians and called for international intervention to halt the violence. Meanwhile, the International Criminal Court, ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir on charges of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. This was the first time a sitting head of state was charged with genocide, marking a milestone in the pursuit of human rights and international justice. However, the Sudanese government refused to cooperate with the ICC and continued its military policies in Darfur. Despite peace efforts, such as the signing of the Darfur Peace Agreement in 2006, the war persisted for years. Negotiations between the warring parties and the international community failed to produce a sustainable solution to the conflict. The Darfur War left devastating humanitarian and political consequences. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives, while millions were forced to live in refugee camps or lost everything they had. Despite peace efforts and reforms over the years, instability and ethnic divisions continue to plague Darfur and surrounding areas. The Darfur conflict exposed the weaknesses of the international human rights protection system and the need for stronger mechanisms to prevent war crimes and genocide. It also highlighted the challenges faced by the international community in intervening in internal conflicts and protecting civilians from the atrocities of authoritarian governments. Looking back at Sudan's tumultuous history, we can draw profound lessons about the complexities of managing cultural, religious, and ethnic diversity. The bloody civil wars that spanned decades underscore the immense challenges faced in the pursuit of unity and self-determination. Sudan's story not only reflects the struggles of its people in their fight for self-governance, but also serves as a reminder of the importance of dialogue and cooperation in resolving conflicts. While peace remains a challenging journey, the hope for a brighter future continues to live in the hearts of the Sudanese people. With support from the international community and their own determined efforts, these two nations may yet find a path toward stability and sustainable development. Sudan's journey is a deeply emotional chapter in history, offering lessons not just for the region, but for the world at large. It is not merely the story of one land, but a shared narrative of humanity's aspirations for peace, freedom, and unity.